Hey, welcome everyone to another AZ Ray video. Today, we're going to have a delicious topic for you to discuss. Today, we're going to talk about food. Most importantly, we're going to talk about tamales. The reason why I want to talk about tamales is because I've been getting a lot of requests to talk about food because food is a very important connection to culture. It arguably is our connection to our culture and our roots. Tamales are very popular in the Abya community, so I was very excited to talk about this, and they're quite delicious. Here's a little preview of some right here. We have some corn husk, and we also have some banana leaf tamales. They have different variants. Most of the time, corn husk, we see them in Mexico regions, and then we see the banana leaf, and most of the time in Central America, most popularly known in regions such as El Salvador. All right, guys, you excited? Today is going to be a delicious one. Thank you guys so much for your support, and shout out to those viewers that chose to remain anonymous but wanted to talk about food. So we're talking about food. For the first section, we're talking about the name origins and why the tamales are very significant. The second part, we're going to talk about the indigenous roots and talk about all the various tribal connections and all the various tribes that have connections and history to the tamal. Third section, we're going to talk about festivals, ceremonies, and deities. It's actually pretty cool. There's different tamales that are associated with different deities, and so I'm going to break that stuff down. Fourth part, we're going to talk about various tamale variations. And we're also going to talk about some other tamales that are very similar, like of other cultures that kind of feel like a tamale, but they're not quite a tamale. Is there origins? Is there connections? We're going to talk about that a little bit. And we're also going to talk about some of the tamale variants and how they came to be because of the Colombian Exchange and other possible roots. We're going to get into that. And the last part is going to be the conclusion. Name origins of tamales. We're going to break it down right now. So there's some Nahua variations from the word tamale, Tamali. The word tamale in Nahua, Tamali, means wrapped. So that's a simple derivative. There are also some other potential Maya roots. There's a Maya glyph that has the word tamal, and it literally means sustenance. So like something like to live by, like an important life essence kind of thing. What's really interesting too is that tamales also have like this close connection to the creation myth, because in a lot of Mesoamerica, indigenous tribes in the Abya region, we see that the current life cycle of people that exists today is relevant to the fifth sun, the fifth cycle, the fifth phase, however you want to phrase that. And because they're believed that we're people of maize. So just very briefly, I'm going to talk about the first 5 cycles. All these cycles are connected with elements, and a lot of these elements are associated with the sun. The sun of water, the people were actually made of ash, and they were eradicated by a massive flood. We see this massive flood connected to various other mythologies like Greek mythology, as well as modern-day Christianity, one depicted with Noah. The second age is the son of the earth. Humans were giants, and they accidentally fell on accident, and they couldn't get up. And they were eventually destroyed and eaten by jaguars. So all these cycles, once again, they have some kind of element of destruction in it. The third age was the son of fire, and in the one day, fire rained and it destroyed a bunch of people, and the people were eventually converted into turkeys. The fourth age is the son of the wind, and that's actually the only cycle where the people were not destroyed. They actually left to the mountains and are believed to have became monkeys. So that's where the origins of monkeys come from in a lot of Mesoamerican cultures. The fifth cycle was actually a process that was created by Quetzalcoatl and Cihuahuatl, and they actually broke up bones and different parts of the people from the previous cycles and the previous suns to form maize and to create the modern day person, where the concept of maize comes from. So that's why we see this importance of maize, and maize is the key ingredient of tamales, because tamales come from corn maize, and it's this very beautiful, complex, strenuous process to give something with a lot of sustenance and nutrients to its consumers. So now that you have an idea of why it's important and the roots affiliated with the name and the culture, now we're going to talk about the indigenous roots. We already talked about it a little bit. Now we're going to go into a little bit more depth. What we see here is that Archaeologists believe that from around 5,000 to 7,000 years ago is approximately what we can find on the various like biological, anthropological records that we have of the origins of tamales. And what's very interesting about this time, it's when women were actually joining men in the battlefield. Not necessarily always in combat, maybe in some instances, but generally they were served as cooks, arguably indebted to women and to the women indigenous past, because if it weren't for them, tamales would exist. Hence my background. That's why we have some ladies there making those tamales, because if it weren't for them, they wouldn't be here today. So that's one way we can honor those people that were able to carry on this tradition and this food. And the other thing too, it's like it's not easy to make. To make some kind of like a niche tamal, which is like the grinding process to make the various maize. It's a strenuous process. But the reason why it was created, the reason why it was cultivated, the way it was made in this cool little convenient wrapped system was because they wanted to create something that would withstand the conditions of war, that would withstand the conditions of like rain, water, humidity, etc. Although most of the time it's cooked or prepared in some kind of pan or some kind of stone appliance, it could also be eaten cold and it still has most of its like nutritional value. So it's very versatile. And then because maize is associated with like holiness, and I'm gonna break that down a little bit more, the significance and the process of maize, but it was seen as like a religious, a therapeutic process to have that close bonding connection with your food. Tamales were popular in all various regions from the Maya, the Olmec, the Toltec, the Mexica/Aztec, and various Inca tribes. We don't necessarily know which tribe started this. We just know that they spread it like wildfire all over the Abya Yala region. And now for the next section, we're going to talk about the various festivals, ceremonies, rituals, and deities associated with tamales. So, very important thing is that tamales, tortillas, various forms of maize, corn was often sacrificed for gods. I'm sure you guys have heard of some like Mexica Aztec stereotypes of like Aztec sacrifice people, and they did. And Aztecs were these complex hitmen that were able to like overrun an empire. A lot of them have like Uto-Aztec origins, believed to have been from somewhere of the four quadrants and the potential like California, Arizona, Colorado region, maybe even Utah. And they immigrated their way down and essentially conquered and used those tactics for religious practices in times of war. So there's this little complex origins when it comes to that kind of stuff. But going back to the origins of the tamales and the maize, like food was also sacrificed. And that was also a much more normalized thing that was happening all over Mesoamerica and the other regions that didn't sacrifice people. Food was a more common thing that was sacrificed. And one of the holiest forms of food was tamales, tortillas, or other forms of maize or corn. And another important section that I want to at least mention and talk about is the Maize God. We do require much more research about it. We have known about its existence from like the 1800s, 1960s, and nowadays we're doing a better job of uncovering more. But I at least want to touch on it since, like I said, the tamales are made of maize, shows the significance and the close connection that is affiliated with Maize God. Hun Huanpu was the Maya Maize God, and it's often neglected when it comes to research. But its origin story of Maize God, it is believed that he rose from a crack after a great battle from the Maya hero twins. The crop of maize is prayed for every day and is reverend for a good harvest. And what we do know for certain is that because of its importance, it has a connection with warfare, politics, also has a modern day connection, as previously mentioned, through the tamal. Now for the next section, we're going to talk about various practices, and there's actually certain tamales associated with certain gods. Pretty cool, right? So what we know for a fact, because there's a lot of documents about it, there was a lot of sacrifices that were done for the jaguar deity, Tezcatlipoca, who is the opposite deity of Quetzalcoatl. Tezcatlipoca is like the god of chaos, the god of hurricanes, conflict. Quetzalcoatl is the god of creation. the god of order. So they're opposites and they're twins when it comes to the various tales in Mesoamerican mythology. Shrimp tamales are associated with Wewe Ote Otel. And this deity is the Lord deity of fire, mostly revered in the Mexican Aztec region, but also revered in the Maya highlands in Guatemala. They have different spelling variants for this fire lord. And then we have bean and honey tamales. And bean and honey tamales are associated with Xipe Totec. And Xipe Totec is the god of rebirth and death, and often is a Mexica Aztec god, and is also siblings with Tezcatlipoca. Since we're talking about different varieties of tamal, we're going to transition into all the various varieties of tamales. So tamales range from plain tamales, tamales with red, green, yellow, or black chile, chocolate tamales, fish tamales, tadpole tamales, mushroom tamales, rabbit tamales, gopher tamales, egg tamales, turkey tamales, bee tamales, quail tamales, pumpkin tamales, berries, and raisin, and so many more. Those are a little bit more of like the indigenous examples. And there's also tamales that are associated with different types of regions in Mesoamerica and Abya as well. The Nicaraguan tamal is known as the Nacatamal. The Guatemala tamal is known as paches or cuchitos. The Bolivian and the Ecuador tamale is known as humita. The Colombian tamale is known as a bollo or bollo. The Venezuelan tamale is known as hayaca or hajaca. The Cuban, Mexican, and South and Central American is known as tamal. And then we have Michoacan and Mexico. They have their own spin to it. They call it the corunda. And the Veracruz in Mexico, they call it the zacahuil. And this part, we're probably getting a little bit more to like the modern variants, because we have the Colombian Exchange that was happening with various colonizations of different foods and harvesting were being introduced into this region of the world. Things that were introduced were like cheese and beef were actually a major import that was imported during this time. And then other foods that was also imported with non-European origins. We have Southeast Asia and Anatolia imported things like sugar, chicken, and pork. And what's so fascinating is that even with all the introductions of the colonizations from various colonizers like the Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, British, in various regions, and they try to introduce people into various grains, but they actually, although they are used, the maize was never eliminated, which is interesting and beautiful, because you would think that something as arduous and painstaking as like breaking down the various components of grain and making into like a flour component takes a long, long time. But it shows the beauty and the connection and the honoring of the tradition, that it was still like their way of holding on to it. So it's really, really fascinating with that, the fact that we still have remnants of like tortillas today, that we still have like atole today, that we still have tamales, which is the emphasis of this video. It's very, very fascinating that as much as all these other grains and breads and other variants of carbs that were introduced into Abya, maize was never eliminated. And I think another reason why we see that maize and tamales weren't eliminated is because previously mentioned, we have like various like festivals and ceremonies. And I already talked about the various tamales associated with various gods. So people had a very close connections with tamales. And then you had people that in combat that were like using them at the regular basis. You had the women that were renovating and making different variants of tamales. And you had like your everyday person that were having tamales as well. It's really beautiful that tamales still play a role. And thank you for our ancestral women that continue to carry on those traditions. So we thank you. Also very fascinating too is that we see also because of the other exchange that we talked about, Southeast Asia, Anatolia, we also see this introduction of the tamales that were brought in by the Spanish in 1521 to the Philippines. And we know there's a Filipino variant to the tamal, and the Filipino tamal variant is known as banaki. And another variant of the tamal, the bubuto tamal. Other similar dishes that are kind of tamale like, for example, in Vietnam, we have the ban bot loc, which is like a tapioca starch with like shrimp and pork. In China or regions like Taiwan, we have like the zongxi or the zong, which is a sticky rice dumpling. And these are often wrapped in like bamboo or banana leaves. So it's very interesting that we see these very actions and patterns that repeat itself from culture and different form of like survival taxes, which is beautiful, and it shows you the cultural differences, but as well as the cultural similarities that we share around the world. It's very fascinating what makes us human. So tamales today are all over Abya. And whether you realize it or not, you eating a tamal, you buying a tamal, you watching this video about tamales, you're contributing. And thank you. Thank you for keeping the tradition alive. Thank you for enjoying this part of culture. And thank you for being open to cultural differences and beauty and just being able to enjoy it in a very savory way. So tamales were a practical meal and snack during times of combat. And I didn't mention it earlier, but I got a little nicked here. So I guess it's kind of relevant with the video. Train martial arts, I got a little nicked a little bit. I like to do a lot of jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, karate, boxing, you name it. I'll do all kinds of martial arts. So I guess this is my way of honoring the tamales as well. And tamales are sold all over the place. And they're sold by local businesses. They're made in local families, often for special occasions and these modern day rituals as well. So just be thankful the next time you have a tamale because you are honoring an honored tradition that's over approximately 5,000 to 7,000 years old, which is pretty cool. And it's a beautiful experience. Tamales are also eaten during times of Christmas, usually some kind of special event, some special family occasions. So just enjoy it. And thank you so much for taking this cultural journey with me. It's been your breakdown from A to Z. Have a blessed day, guys, and keep it positive out there. Take care.